Hello, everybody. My name is David Plazas. I am the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this forum. And this is an opportunity, this is a public service that allows us to present to you candidates for the Senate District 19 of the state of Tennessee. We are in primary election season. The state and federal primary is August 4th. And in this race, it's an open seat to succeed Senator Brenda Gilmore. The district encompasses North Nashville and parts of Antioch. Early voting goes through Saturday, and election day is next Thursday. This is a project, a public service project, in conjunction with the Civility Tennessee campaign and Black Tennessee Voices. And I'm excited to introduce now the curator of Black Tennessee Voices, LeBron Hill, will be your moderator for tonight. Thank you very much, LeBron.
Thank you, David. Yeah, this is my first candidate forum that I'm moderating, so I'm very excited, and I'm very thankful for you guys to be, for being here today. Just to kind of go over a little bit of the format for today. We will be the timekeeping will be managed by David Plazas, enforced by me, the moderator. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to make an opening statement, and they will be called on by alphabetical order. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer a question. There are 12 questions in total. If a candidate is named by another, that person will be able to address or rebut the statement for 30 seconds. The moderator, me and myself, will ask as many questions as possible, providing equal opportunity for time to all candidates. And each candidate will have 90 seconds at the end to make a closing statement. That sound good? All right. All right, so I'm going to start off by introducing the candidates by alphabetical order. Jerry Maynard is most notably a Metro Council member from 2007 to 2015. He has worked as an attorney, pastor, and consultant, and is the president of the consulting firm Maynard Group. Charlene Oliver is an award-winning community organizer and servant. In 2016, Oliver co-founded the Equity Alliance, a statewide nonprofit which focuses on social justice issues such as voting rights. And as I can see, Lou Wallace is not here right now, but if he is, we'll bring him into the fold here soon. But let's go ahead and let's start with Maynard. Please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Jerry Maynard. I'm running for state senate. To tell you a little bit about me, I have been preparing for this office for the last 25 to 30 years here in Nashville. I've lived in North Nashville for 24 years. Of those 25 to 30 years, I've been here, moved here in 1995, bad at math. But I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Tennessean, and thank you for hosting us. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a United States Army veteran, pastor, owner of a business, a small business here in Nashville, Tennessee. We grew up from nothing, started with one client, and now we're one of the largest public relations firms here in Tennessee. And so I'm really happy. I just believe that I've been prepared for this seat. I've been serving 8 years on the Metro Council where we're able to get certain things done. For example, saving General Hospital, providing contracts for women-owned businesses and minority-owned business. When I came on the council, less than 1% of all contracts were going to women and minority-owned businesses. Now that's up to 13%. We were able to also provide care for those who are uninsured and underinsured, and making sure that the 75,000 people who rely on General Hospital get high-quality health care. Another thing we were able to do is make sure that we got the National Museum for African American Music. I'm so proud of that. I was able to sponsor the bill that got the $10 million for the National Museum for African American Music. I worked with our Minority Caucus in order to get that done. And then I raised $500,000 myself for the museum. I'm here to not only fight, but have victories. And I believe that's prepared me to be United States, not United States, but state senator for Tennessee. And I ask for your vote.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Maynard. Charlene?
Good evening, LeBron, David, and the Tennessean, and to the listeners. Thank you for having me. Of course, I'm no stranger to the Tennessean. You all named the 2020 Tennessean of the Year, and 2 years ago for my work in the community. It's a pleasure to be here. For those that don't know me, I'm originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. Tennessee has been my home for the past 21 years. I came here as a student to attend Vanderbilt University, and I just love the city, love the state so much I never left. I'm raising a family here. I live in Bordeaux. Currently, I've lived in different parts of District 19, Antioch, as well as Goodlettsville, and been together with my husband, who works in law enforcement, for 17 years, and we have 3 children together. My oldest 2 are in public schools currently. I'm a product of public schools. I was raised in poverty by a single mom. I understand what it's like to struggle, but I've also know what it's like to overcome obstacles. My mom is a public school teacher currently at Little Rock Central High School, and my dad is an Air Force veteran. You know, I'm running because I believe in fairness. I believe that folks like me and who haven't had a fair shake in life deserve a fair shot. And so I'm running to make sure that I center the humanity of people. I started the Equity Alliance, and that is some of the work that I've done, but I've been a public servant my entire career, nearly 20 years. I have helped to work at the state level, as well as the local level and the federal level, serving under Congressman Jim Cooper for some of those years, and I can get into some of my accomplishments later.
All right, thank you so much, Charlene. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. To begin, let's start talking about equity. And this question is for both Jerry Maynard and Charlene Oliver. The community needs evaluation conducted by Metropolitan Social Services shows that 16% of Black Nashvillians and nearly half of Black single mothers live in poverty. So my question is, how do you intend on bringing Black Nashvillians above that poverty line? Let's start with Jerry Maynard.
Well, one was when we were on the Metro Council, we were able to pass and make sure that all Metro Council persons were receiving a living wage. And I think that is important. We need to make sure that we then go to the private sector. And I believe that we should have a living wage for all Tennesseans here in the state of Tennessee, and support legislation to make sure that happens. Also, there are many nonprofits that are also working on making sure that all citizens have a guaranteed income level. I'm also supportive of that, and I had a meeting with a nonprofit that is really responsible for advocating and providing education and educating not only our legislatures at the state level, but also at the local level. But I also believe in this. We got to make Nashville more affordable. And one of the things I want to do to make Nashville more affordable is to get rid of and eliminate the sales tax on groceries and food. You look at that, that's the most regressive tax we have in the state of Tennessee. It really hurts poor people. It hurts middle-class people. And I believe that there's enough votes both on the Republican side and the Democratic side to eliminate the sales tax on groceries and food. That will then give relief to our families, our working families. And I believe that we should also have affordable housing. I want to bring 3,000 new units of affordable housing over the next 8 years, working with our new director of MDHA. I believe by doing that, I think that we can help. And I believe that we can then deal with poverty. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry Maynard. Charlene?
Yes, I think, equity is one of these words we like to throw around as a buzzword, and has been used ineffectively, unfortunately. I believe that equity is in your budget and who has the power to make those budget decisions. Show me your budget and you show me your priorities. And so one of the things I did through the Equity Alliance is something called the Our Fair Share campaign during the pandemic. Made sure that, we advocated to make sure that Black and brown people in Tennessee and in Nashville were getting their fair share of resources to combat the pandemic. We saw how the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated so many disparities in our city, whether it was the health disparities or the racial wealth gap in our city. And so $28 million of the $121 million of CARES Act resources went into the hands of direct relief. And so I think we got to advocate for more resources in our state budget to go directly to our minority small businesses, but also the technical assistance that goes along with minority businesses that were struggling during the pandemic, making sure we educate them and have the operational funding to make sure that they can have to compete for dollars in the state budget.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you so much. Next question is kind of leaning towards gentrification. It's something that when you think of District 19, gentrification comes to mind. So my question is, how will you ensure that members of your district will not be left behind due to those changes? We'll start with Charlene this time.
Yeah, I am rather, disturbed by what I see in our city. Parts of our city in Nashville's economic boom are getting left behind. And it's traditionally those neighborhoods that get overlooked, like Antioch and like Bordeaux and North Nashville, neighborhoods in District 19. And that is unfortunate. What I would like to do is advocate like I've been doing, like when Oracle moved here, announced their move, and other companies. It's not a bad thing that companies are moving here, but how do we make it fair and equitable for them and not displace people? And so I have a 12-point plan and rubric that I will be using to look at how companies are receiving corporate incentives, how are they moving pathways out of poverty and creating livable wages, their supplier diversity, and how those things, create that. But also, how are you making sure that you are investing in the community through affordable housing units to make sure that not just the people who live here but are moving here, but people who live here actually can benefit from the companies moving here as well.
Thank you, Sean. Mr. Maynard.
Specifically, let's deal with gentrification, and that is when you have people come in from outside the community, they buy up, the price that goes up, the taxes go up, and then people who historically lived there cannot live there. So what we did on Jefferson Street when I was the chairman of the board for Jefferson United Merchants Partnership, we made sure that we wanted to make sure every person that was there historically were the persons who did the development. One of the things you can do in North Nashville, especially Bordeaux, and working with them, is that we need to make sure that the developers are the people who live there and have lived there for the last 30 to 40 years. That's how you ensure that you do not have gentrification. Just the same way we did on Jefferson Street, we could do it in Bordeaux. The other thing we want to do in South Nashville is we want to make it illegal for companies to come into Antioch and Southeast Nashville, buy up entire communities. They are buying all the entire communities, and then they're driving the prices up so that people can no longer afford to buy there or live there. We need to stop that, make that illegal. And those are two ways that we can deal with gentrification here in Nashville.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maynard, for that answer. Let's go ahead and shift our focus to homelessness. Nashville's chronic homelessness is seemingly a revolving door. 42% of Nashville's recorded adult population experiencing homelessness are Black. So what resources and funding will you seek to provide for people experiencing homelessness? We'll start with Mr. Maynard.
I'm glad you asked that question. I've been working in ministry and dealing with those persons who are without homes for the last 25 years. In fact, my church was an outreach church. And for the last 12 years, on each Saturday and Sunday, we opened up our clothing bank and our food bank. But more importantly than that, we also made sure that people who did not have homes made sure that they got the assessment. And that is, do you need a state HOA? How can we hire people? How can we get employers to come and hire you if you have previously been in prison and or incarcerated? We wanted to make sure that you had the resources in healthcare. So we work with General Hospital, Matthew Walker, providing wraparound services. Here is the main point. Nashville has never had a policy countywide to deal with our homeless population. Our policy is arrest you if you're downtown until the CMA or some other big festival is over, and arrest them while there and then release them. That cannot be the policy. And we have to work with the local government and the state government to provide wraparound service for both the chronic homeless and those who are acute homeless, because there's two different homeless populations that are here in Nashville. That is my passion. That's the ministry that I've been involved with for 25 years.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Charlene?
Yeah, I want to speak to the powers that we actually have at the state level, and state senate and the state legislature is the power of the purse. It's who holds the resources in our state, and so we have to always think about who has the money, and and also think broadly about what we think about the unhoused. Yes, we have people walking on our streets who are homeless and without shelter, but also there are children and families in our metro schools who are sleeping in their cars. There are people that are affected by natural disaster who lost their homes after the 2020 tornado. And so we got to make sure that we have resources being directed to our nonprofits who can respond, who direct resources to our local government who needs to have local FEMA money as well as TEMA money to respond to natural disaster. So I think we need to make sure that we are directing resources and having those funds set aside in the governor's budget to make sure that we can address homelessness, but also repeal laws like the homelessness bill that they criminalize homelessness to sleep on state property. Those are bills that I will actually absolutely oppose.
Thank you. So we kind of talked about affordable housing already, or you have someone has mentioned it before. Interest hikes and inflation have created higher costs for home buyers. For example, going from a 3.2 interest rate last year to now a 5.5 interest rate is a major climb for a multi-year mortgage. Not to mention some renters have reported 50% hikes to their housing budget. So what will you do to create legislation that will allow home buyers and renters alike to thrive in an expensive Nashville? Let's start with Shirley.
I'm glad you asked that. One of the things I did after the 2020 tornado was launch something called Don't Sell at North campaign. It was an effort to make sure that we, one, put money into hands of people who needed to recover from the tornado, who lost their homes, who lost groceries, who needed repairs, but also to hold accountable shady developers who were trying to swoop in and buy up people's property. And we have people, I talk to people all the time, including myself, who get text messages from people from out of state who are trying to buy their properties. I have legislation, which is what I wanted to do after the Don't Sell Out North campaign, but COVID hit, unfortunately, and we had to redirect our attention. But I would like to pass legislation that holds accountable developers who are harassing homeowners, who are trying to swoop in and take generational wealth from them. We have older, aging seniors who are living in our community who want to keep their homes, want to pass that down to their children, and so that is the legislation I would love to pass to hold developers accountable and regulate those practices to stop harassing homeowners as well.
Thank you so much. Mr. Maynard.
Number one, I want to work with the new MDHA director. He has put H back in the MDHA. He's put a focus back on housing and not just development. I'm excited. They were able to do 200 new affordable housing units in the development right there in Rosa Parks. Let's do 3,000 new affordable housing units over the next 8 years. How do we do that? By getting money from HUD at the state level and at the local level, and working to do mixed income development, affordable housing and workforce housing development. We also can deal with our zoning. And I want to deal with this point because this is critically important, is that when I was on the Metro Council, I sponsored the law that stated that if you were going to do affordable housing as a developer, you got a 25% across the board cut in all of your fees that you have to pay to Metro. Get this, if you subdivide a lot, you take a lot, has one house, you want to subdivide it in order to put multiple housing, multifamily housing or regular housing, you pay the same fee as someone who wants to build million dollar houses. We've got to incentivize developers by cutting those fees so that they in turn have an incentive to do affordable housing. So you have the government doing affordable housing, you have private developers doing affordable housing, and we set a policy. And I want to get rid of the law at the state level that makes it illegal for the Metro Council to come up with zoning laws that allow us to have mixed use zoning for affordable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Appreciate that. So, we've talked, about broader issues. I would like to kind of bring it down to, you guys in general. So for Mr. Maynard, during the campaign trail, you've said that you wanted to distinguish yourself from other candidates by making the case that you are running to be a legislator and not a protester. Would you like to expand on that idea?
Sure. So what happens is that I was a social activist, community activist before I got elected. I also served as the deputy chairman of the Tennessee Democratic Party and the chair of the finance committee for the Tennessee Democratic Party, doing voter registration all over the state, registering the people, starting Democratic chapter, college Democrat chapters all throughout the state. And so I work with the NAACP, the Urban League. I work with the unions and the labor when we were dealing with injustice here in our city. But once you get to the legislator, it's different. You have to understand how legislation works. You have to understand the process. You have to understand how committees work. You have to be able to deal with the budget. And you have to understand that experience matters. And as a legislator, it's different from being a protester. You have to understand when you use your leverage, both to have, let's come together and organize, but you also then use your leverage of the things that you have for the different departments so that you can say to your colleague, what do we have in common? You live in Tipton County, I live in Davidson County. What can we do to bring things together so that we can use our commonality to get a law passed? I may not get everything I want, you may not get everything you want, but we can come in the middle and get something done.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Charlene, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is the Axios article. And, honestly, I did feel like it was a dig. Honestly, I have stood with protesters. I have been a protester myself. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court just stripped the women's right to choose and have bodily autonomy. We have a Republican party who is hostile, who passes bills to attack LGBT members, to attack women, to attack children, the homelessness. People are left with no option but to protest sometimes. And so we cannot. That is a tactic that can be used and has been effective. It got the Nathan Bedford Forrest bus removed from the Capitol. So I think we can't demean protesters legislators stood with me when I protested at the Capitol 7 months pregnant, opposing the voter registration criminalization bill in 2019 that suppressed our right to help people register to vote through the Equity Alliance, where we registered 91,000 people to vote. So we cannot demean protesters, but we can use effective strategies to be effective in using all of our civic tools at our disposal.
All right. Thank you, Charlene. So kind of going back to Charlene, you are no stranger to voting rights and advocacy, as you just talked about. How will you translate what you've done in the nonprofit advocacy realm to the State House?
Yes, like I said, I have been serving in nonprofit and government work for my entire career. My first job out of college was working for the Tennessee Department of Human Services, serving clients who needed food stamps, TennCare, and Families First. And so I've served. I have saw people at their greatest need in crisis after tornadoes, after Hurricane Katrina, people whose families parents went to prison and their children needed a mentor. I have always been where the people are, and I think that has served me well. We need not only legislators who know how to legislate. Yes, I know how to do that. I know the legislative process, but we also need to serve with compassion. We also need to think broadly about what it means to be an elected official, and we miss out on the constituency part in serving and being accessible and available to our constituents. That's something I pledge to do. Accountability and transparency is part of my platform to make sure I'm talking back to my constituents, building coalition across the state like I've always done. And I think that will serve me well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Maynard, would you care to respond?
Certainly. I'm so excited because I want to use one example. The mayor's budget came when I was on the Metro Council that underfunded General Hospital, and the CEO said the General Hospital would not be able to last for 6 months. In other words, it would close. So we used, as a legislator, I said, okay, what are my tools in the toolbox? One is we organized Maharian the students and doctors. Two, we organized the churches. We created a protest by sending in cards that we were able to produce. And we sent in over 4,000 cards to the mayor's office saying, save General Hospital. We didn't have a protest on the steps of the Metro Courthouse. But then once we did that, we used that as leverage to create policy. So then we were able to file a bill in order to change the budget so that we can get General Hospital more money. So I was not taking a dig at protesters. I don't know why you all insinuated that. I'm saying that you cannot stop at protesting. Protesting has then got to go to policy. The only way that you change the nation and you change the constituents' quality of life has to go from protest to policy. Once you get policy done, then you have to execute that policy and make sure it's equitably enforced. So you have to have all of the tools in your toolbox to get things done for your constituents.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Thank you. So next, going back to the state house, or the current state of Tennessee, right now it's in a Republican GOP stronghold. As a Democrat, how will you seek to work with those across the aisle? Let's start with Charlene.
Yes, like I've been doing. I want people to be very, very clear that we are in a Republican supermajority. Tennessee was not always a red state, and I actually say Tennessee is not a red state. We're a non-voting state, and we're an oppressed state, especially when less than half of our state votes in elections right now. We were 50th in voter turnout in 2014 and have consistently ranked in the bottom 5 states for voter turnout. So we're a state that needs to do better about participating, and so that's one thing. Can you repeat the question again? I want to make sure I'm answering it right.
Yeah. Well, how will you seek to work with people across the aisle?
Yes. And so, yes, I have worked in coalition with groups across the state to build coalition and propose legislation. I have already proposed bipartisan legislation. Voting rights restoration work was proposed by 2 Republicans, State Senator Steve Dickerson and Michael Curcio at the time, and it got as far as it's ever gotten outside of the House Judiciary Committee. And so I want to finish the job to make sure in the Senate we get that bill passed.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard.
I'm the only candidate on this call that's actually gotten legislation passed. And I have passed over 70 major bills in the Metro Council that had, at the time, we had 17 Republicans, we had Democrats, we had independents, we had Green Party, we had those who were progressive and those who were ultra conservative. And the way that you do it is you have to go and you have to reach across the aisle. You have to reach every person and say, listen, we've got a problem. We've got an issue that this legislation can solve. And your constituents in your district, in your county, where you're from, have the same problems that I'm dealing with this particular piece of legislation. Then you have to work it through the committee to get out of the committee to get to the floor. What do we have to do to get this piece of legislation through the committee? By making sure we do not compromise its principle, its purpose, and its effectiveness. But then how do we work together to make sure that legislation can pass the committee to get to the floor and to get enough votes for it to pass? You have to work with coalitions within the legislature. You then have to, you can use protests, you can use media, whatever leverage you have, you use that leverage in order to get the number of votes that you need to get passed. I'm the only one in this call who's gotten legislation actually passed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Maynard. Next question. If you were to be elected as a state senator, what would be the first steps for you? What would be the first thing that you would want to get accomplished or set the goals you have for yourself? Let's start with Charlene.
I just want to respond and say I'm actually the only person who has been successful at the state level. There's a difference between local and state and federal levels of government. It's called federalism. And I have been successful twice against our Republican legislature in stopping harmful bills in court, twice, to make sure that people had access to absentee ballots during COVID, and making sure that people did not get criminalized for voter registration because of our hostile voter suppressive Republican legislature. So what I would want to do is make sure I've develop relationships. I want to be making sure that I've already developed relationships with our Democratic caucus. I also have relationships with some of our Republicans. I want to continue to make sure I am working in coalition, meeting with those legislators, seeing how things work. Let's be real. We want to, we don't know what we don't know once we get into those offices, but I do want to make sure I am knowing who the players are on the Hill and doing that and being realistic about what we can accomplish in our first year. But I have a platform to do that, and you can go to Oliver for TN Senate to see my full platform.
Thank you, Charlene. Mr. Maynard.
From 2003 to 2007, I worked in the state at the Hill every day during when they were in legislative session. As the deputy chairman of the Tennessee Democratic Party, at that time, we did have a majority in the House. So I don't want to make that, I want to make sure that's clear. But I worked every day on the Hill with legislation that was important to our labor groups, that was important to our constituents. So I worked and at the federal level, I worked from 2000, I can't remember the years, but I was a government relations officer for Bishop G.E. Patterson and the Church of God in Christ. I was in D.C. a month. I was in Harold Ford Jr.'s office every week going up there regarding legislation. My number one priority is dealing with affordability in Davidson County. My number one priority, first thing I will do, is to eliminate the sales tax on food and groceries. Gas prices are sky high. Food costs are sky high. Let's bring relief to Davidson County and our residents by eliminating the sales tax on food and groceries. There are Republicans who support it. I believe we can get that law passed. I want to work with Vincent Dixie and Harold Love Jr. and others to get that law passed to eliminate this regressive tax.
Thank you so much, Mr. Maynard. Let's take this point to kind of do more of a personal question here. What are two places that you tell visitors they must see to experience the Black Nashville that you enjoy the most? They could be a restaurant or an attraction, for example. I'll go ahead and start with Charlene.
Two places, just two. I always, when my family's in town, I always take them to Slimmy Husky's. Got to go eat pizza at Slimmy Husky's on Buchanan Street. So that's one place. Love to go down to Frankie Pierce Park. It just means so much to me whenever someone wants to meet up or go to a photo shoot, or I tell them Frankie Pierce Park downtown is the place to go. The beautiful mural right there on the wall of Frankie Pierce. She was one of the women's suffragists in Tennessee that got Tennessee the right for women to vote. So that is a place of significant meaning. Thirdly, the National Museum of African American Music downtown is a jewel. Go see it. I love to send people there as well when they're coming from out of town.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Maynard.
The number one place is, I'm so proud. They said we could never build the National Museum for African American Music. When Dr. Boyd was alive, he came to me and he said, listen, the Dean administration took capital improvement dollars away from the museum. We were able to get that money back in at $10 million. We had a fundraiser at Carl Dean's home where we raised $256,000 in order to keep the momentum going. They said we could never get the museum done. I serve on the board of the National Museum for African American Music. I've been there with my sleeves rolled up to get that museum built and sustained. And so I've been raising money. I've raised over $500,000 personally for the museum. So I take everybody that comes to town, I take them to the museum. Now, it depends on who my guests are. Some people want to go see the baseball. They want to go over to Soperdale, which I'm proud of. We were able to make sure that Soperdale was the destination for the baseball stadium and not on the river downtown. We had already spent $1 billion in investment downtown. We needed to invest money north of Charlotte. That was the largest investment at the time, north of Charlotte. And I'm so proud of bringing baseball back to its birthplace at Soperdale, where and Ludi knows better than I do, where we had the Negro League play baseball at Soperdale.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Maynard. I wrote a piece recently about the Nashville Stars and their hope to be a part of Nashville soon. So to that point, what will you do to ensure that when developers come to Nashville, that they are being a part of North Nashville or wherever they may be? How will you ensure that they are not just taking land away from Black Nashvilleians? Let's go ahead and start with Jerry.
Well, first of all, number one, I believe emphatically, you cannot wait till a developer comes to town to start talking about equities, to start talking about affordable housing, to start talking about poverty. We need to be talking about that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12 months out of the year. We need a Black agenda. We also need an agenda for those of us who believe in solving the problems of poverty, solving the problems of this not being an affordable city for everybody, affordable housing, all of those issues. That's something we need to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. We need to come up with our own agenda and how we get that done. What laws can we pass? What policies can we pass? What are the resources? As Charlene said, part of being a legislator is not just passing legislation. It's working with different departments to see what resources they have. And at the state level, you can look at the federal government that brings money, that pass through money that comes to the state that goes to the counties. You know what's going on with Governor Lee right now? There are federal dollars that have come to the state that is sitting there, billions of dollars that the governor will not release to the local counties in order to deal with relief from poverty and other issues. So that's how we deal with it. We've got to have an agenda that we deal with this on a day-to-day basis. We can't just wait till somebody comes into town. You've got to be dealing with it every day.
Charlene.
Yeah. To wait until a developer comes to town is a very reactive stance, and we got to be proactive. One thing right now that I would love to see is we need a vision for Nashville. We need a plan for Nashville's growth. What are the top industries that we are trying to attract? How are we building up workforce development and creating pipelines, not only from pre-K all the way through college? And so those are some things I want to look at and see in our next plan. But Jerry's right. We need a Black agenda. One of the things I hear when I worked in Congressman Cooper's office is we never give the legislator the ideas. We're waiting for legislators to always come up with the plan, but what do you want as constituents? And so we got to coalesce around that. And one of the other things that I see that doesn't always happen is we find out about these plans and things happen on the back end, but how are you engaging the community on the front end and communicating that plan all throughout the steps? And so I want to see more community engagement, bringing everyday constituents into the process to communicate what we want in a plan for outside developers who are coming here.
Thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you. To that point, a lot of people that I've talked to in the community, especially Black Nashvilleians, they want to feel like they're a part of Nashville. They want to have a table, if you will. How will you, as state senators, help build that table for Black Nashvilleians, being able to build equity, as we've talked about, being able to really, as Charlene kind of pointed out, being able to actually, have something there for Black Nashville? Let me go ahead and point that to Jerry.
Certainly. So one of the things we did is we built the National Museum for African American Music because we did not have an institution here that celebrated the contribution outside of the HBCUs that celebrated the history and contribution of African Americans to this great city and to this great state and this great nation. So we built it, and here's how you do it. You've got to build a coalition of people together, both Black, white, and brown folks. Bring a coalition with your agenda. How do we make sure that we, number one, have an agenda that we're meeting? When I was on the Metro Council, that's what we did with the Minority Caucus. But not only did we do it with the Minority Caucus, I also not sponsored, but we held meetings on economic development. We would call special called meetings. Come down to the chamber. Let's talk about economic development. Let's talk about affordable housing. Let's talk about criminal justice reform. Erica Gilmore and I worked on that, on checking the box. All of those things have to be done, but it has to be done strategically, systemically. You've got to be, we've got to be proactive. And so what I would like to do is I would like to create a Black caucus of all of the elected officials in the state of Tennessee who are African American, and create a statewide Black caucus where we come to a convention and we talk about, let's come up with our agenda for West, Middle, and East Tennessee.
Thank you, Jerry. Ms. Sherlin.
Yeah, I do believe that coalition building is one of the reasons why the Equity Alliance, the organization I built the past 6 years, has been so successful. We understand that we can't do this work in coalition, but I also understand that we have to have organized political power and organized money. And through the Equity Alliance, we've been able to do that. But I also believe it has to be done from the grassroots and the ground up. One of the things that we did was called the Black Print. It was an effort to survey everyday Tennesseans across the state. And we were able to talk to at least 10,000 people across the state to ask them, what do you want in a policy agenda? And so that's why I think we've been so successful, is to really just ask everyday people who want to be heard. But secondly, we've done it in coalition across ethnicities, but across geographic. I've worked in coalition with groups, labor organizations, groups like Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, Justice for Our Neighbors, Memphis for All. These are groups who are talking to the people on the ground, and that's what matters. We got to have that type of coalition. I want to bring coalition groups with our electeds in the district as well, council members as well as state legislators talking to each other regularly.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've done some reporting on District 19 race. I live in District 19, so it is close to my heart. But factually, it was a very different race a couple months back, a different landscape. And now, you've got, there's a completely different race here. So what I want to know from you guys is, what made you guys, after that, the skullduggery took effect, what made you guys want to run? We can go ahead and start with Jerry.
So in 2003, I met with Brenda Gilmore and told her I wanted to run for the state Senate. I then went and met with Senator Harper at the time and said, what can I do to support you, to learn more about the state, what's going on? Because that one day I want to be the state senator. And she looked at me like I had horns coming out of my head. Like, how dare you come and tell me you want my seat? I was like, oh, I was naive. I didn't know I shouldn't have come to you and told you that. I was naive. And so when Thelma Harper was stepping down, Brenda and I met, and she said that she wanted to run for the state Senate. Brenda and I have been friends for a long time. I said, I'm going to support you. I became her finance chair, and we raised money for her and helped her get elected to the state Senate. I did not expect to run for the state because I thought Brenda was going to be there for the next 4 years. And so when she decided to step down, I called her immediately, even though, she had selected someone else. I called her immediately and told her, listen, I'm going to run. I've always wanted this seat. I've always wanted this seat. And so I'm going to run for this seat. And so I've always wanted to run for this seat since 2003, because I know the power of this at the state level, not just getting legislation passed, but really dealing with all the different departments and the resources to bring our constituents.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard. Shirley?
Yeah. When my oldest son, who's 10 now, when he was born 2 days before Trayvon Martin was murdered back in 2012, I started asking the question of, how do we hold government accountable? How do we hold a government accountable who is not working fairly for people who look like me? And that is what led me to start the Equity Alliance. And since then, since 2016, I have been trying to actively work to change the political landscape in Tennessee, to stop politics as usual, to make sure that democracy works for everyone. And I've done that through helping to register 91,000 people to vote, helping to elect progressives to the state and local offices, by training up liberators to be political newcomers and civic leaders. I've tried to lay the groundwork And so when the skullduggery happened, it really went against my values, to be quite honest. I saw the same thing that the Republicans do to us that was happening to us as well, rigging of the rules to make sure that only the few get to decide. And I don't think this is the people's seat. It belongs to the people, and the people get to decide to have elections. And I wanted to run to make sure that people had a great option. And that's why I'm running for state senate, and I asked for their vote.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you so much. One of my next questions, if you could, this is more of a easy, more personal question, but could you name a person that who has had a deep influence in your life, and what's one lesson that you could share with the audience? We'll go ahead and start with Jerry.
Well, I can name so many. One of them is my father, Bishop Maynard. I'm a fourth generation pastor. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father and my mother before she passed were all pastors. And that the way they brought me up, and my father, the thing about service, being a servant of the people, loving God's people, putting God's people first, community first, that you have to make sure that the community cannot be strong. People are struggling. People are being oppressed, suppressed. They cannot vote. They don't have equity and opportunities in their life. They don't have an opportunity of a fair playing ground in order to have their dreams, God-inspired dreams and desires to come to pass. When I was 3 and 4 years old, we used to go into the prisons. We would have praise and worship. My dad would preach. We would come back. I understood homelessness back then when I was 5, just raised with a heart to serve. And so when I saw injustice, when I saw people not being served, I saw, especially in 2003, 2004, 2005, when I really got involved in politics. I didn't get involved in politics because I wouldn't have a title. I got involved in politics because I saw what was happening. We didn't have elected officials. And this is really important. When I moved here, we had one countywide elected Black person. And I started doing classes on how to get elected as a campaign manager consultant. And now look how many people who are African Americans are now elected. And that is what I am so proud of as legacy. But my dad, my biggest hero.
Thank you for sharing that. Charlene.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to pick just one. But when I look back over my life, it's been Black women who have really literally gotten me here, literally and figuratively. I think about my mom. She was a fighter. She made sure that she instilled education, the importance of education in me. She worked full time when I was in school, but she also went to school full time during my childhood. She went in at the age of 45, went and got her bachelor's degree the same week that I graduated high school. And so my mom is the example of how to persevere over poverty, over domestic violence, over all the things set against me. And that's where I get my fighting warrior spirit from, is from her. She's always told me to always go for what I want. And so my mom is my greatest example. Secondly, Joyce Searcy. At the time when I realized I wanted to serve the community and go into the nonprofit and government field, it was her working at the Bethlehem Centers of Nashville at the time, and I was her intern. She took me everywhere, and I saw this Black woman leading, and that is what inspired me to start the Equity Alliance, my own nonprofit that is successful today. Thank you
for sharing. Thank you for sharing that, Charlene. I wanted to make sure that the audience knows that if they would like to ask a question to Charlene and Maynard, please share that in the chat, or and David will get that question to me. Next question. Mayor Cooper's Economic Development Director, Courtney Poe, resigned recently. What does that mean for economic development in North Nashville and Antioch, and what could you do as a senator? Let's go ahead and start with Charlene.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, because I do believe in right now, when Nashville is in the height of its boom and economic boom and the growth, the economic development officer is probably one of the most important positions in the mayor's office right now. And unfortunately, what I see is that it's not connected to some of the players behind the scenes who are pulling the strings, like the Nashville Chamber, who is doing the city's bidding with the state to bring companies here, and not including Courtney in those conversations, or at least not on the front end. And he doesn't have a budget. So those are things that are unfortunate, there could have been some things done differently there. I do think that, some parts of Nashville have lost its voice because of Courtney Pogue not being in the office. But I think we can restructure some things. I think we got to look broadly about how we do economic development deals in the city, and presents an opportunity to restructure how the city has a plan for Nashville's growth.
Thank you, Charlene.
Well, first of all, and this is the biggest point, is that we do not have an economic policy or an economic development policy. We have not done an economic development assessment. We haven't done an assessment to see what the city needs in every aspect, from infrastructure to workforce development, to housing, to what type of corporations do we need? Do we have the type of workforce? We have not done an assessment, and we do not have a policy nor a plan. As a state senator, what I want to do is work with Nashville and the Metro Council to say, you have to have, number one, a policy after you've done an assessment. We don't even know what the needs are in Davidson County. If you ask the if you ask the ECD office, what are the needs? And they could tell you, well, I believe it's this, I believe it's that. Where's your study? Where's your assessment? Where's your survey? What have you done to provide the evidence that we can come to the state and say, these are the things we need, and to have a policy to do it? Second, you've got to have more than just one person in that office. You've got to have an entire team, an entire budget. You have to have a policy that works with the state. And right now, economic development is piecemeal and driven by the private sector. The reason why we have many of these problems, the reason why we have these problems is because we do not have a policy, and that's why. And it's the private sector has been driving it.
Thank you so much. Next question. With gerrymandering of Nashville's congressional district, how can you make sure, as a state senator, to work with members of Congress of districts 5, 6, and 7 to give your district citizens what they need? Let's go ahead and start with Sean.
Well, I'm proud to say I was one of only 4 people when the gerrymandering and redistricting conversations were happening earlier this year in January. I was only one of 4 people who testified to the Senate Redistricting Committee to advocate to not break up Nashville into 3 congressional districts. I advocated against that and actually presented a map on behalf of the Equity Alliance of how you could do that fairly and keep the Black vote together, which would have been about 28% of the city's voting power. And so I will work with all of our congressional officers to make sure that Nashville does have a voice. I will help to be that voice, even though we are currently going to be controlled by potentially Republicans in rural counties. And so I will help to do that. I think litigation is a real thing that we need to look at as well, to make sure that we have a voice and ensure that voice, and fight like heck to ensure that. So that's some of the things I can do to make sure that Nashville has a voice, and continue to talk with groups on the outside to make sure that they are organizing in rural communities and suburban areas as well.
Thank you so much. Mr. Maynard.
Number one, you have to have litigation. We've got to sue again for each of those 3 congressional districts. That's number one. Number two, we've got to have a strategic plan. And I've been talking with several people about how do we work within the system that they've currently created. And this is what we've come up with. We need a plan in order to take the majority of all 3 congressional districts over the next 6 election cycles. We need a plan by which that we can take back those congressional seats by registering people to vote, motivating people to come vote, getting people who are good candidates who can win in those particular congressional districts. And we need to win those districts. That's how we win. We go and we win those congressional districts. I'm telling you, the rural areas used to be Democrat. And when you make it a Tennessee Democratic value system and you say, hey, we're not a New York Democrat, we're not a California Democrat, we're Tennessee Democrats. What do we stand for? What do we value? We need to go to the rural areas and the urban areas, and we need to say, we're going to take back these congressional districts and we're going to win those particular congressional districts. We can't do it in this cycle, but I think in 3 cycles, 6 years from now, needs to be our plan that we will win all 3 seats.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. The next question I have up is surrounding criminal justice. So the state passed truth in sentencing this year. Critics say that it is inequitable for Black and brown citizens. What will you do about criminal justice if elected? Let's go ahead and start with Charlene.
Bills like that laws like that are truth in sentencing laws, essentially are designed and meant to target Black and poor and brown communities, and it's going to regress us backwards. It's an effort to take us backwards to 1994, where we had the crime bill and certain laws that were designed to target Black neighborhoods, exacerbated the mass incarceration problem. And so we're going to see a rise in our budget, and it's going to be very, very costly to our state. And so Republicans claim to be fiscally conservative. This was not a fiscally conservative bill. It is going to cost the state a lot of money. And so that is going to be harmful. That is money that we could be redirecting into prevention programs, programs that get to the heart and root of the problem, like violence interruption programs, like Cure Violence program that is right here in Nashville. We could be directing that into public education to make sure our communities have the root supports to support the root causes of gun violence and
Thank you so
crime.
much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Maynard.
Number one, I want to repeal the law. And we have to fight like heck. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not going to be easy. But we've got to work with the Republicans, not work with them, but talk to them. And we got to show them the harm. As Charlene said, you got to show the economic harm. Now, one thing Republicans worship is money, right? So we got to show them that you will not be able to provide for your certain projects that you want in your particular districts because you're going to be having your prison budget continue to increase. So we got to show them that we need to repeal it or amend it. That's number one. And number two, we need to legalize marijuana. We have too many people who are going to jail. We have too many people who are still in jail because of minor amounts of marijuana. And we know disproportionately how it impacts Black and brown folks. We need to legalize marijuana. We need to first start with medical marijuana use, and then go to more the more freedom of just legalizing all of it. And so I believe those two things will help us with criminal justice reform. The last thing I will say, I don't know everything as a state senator. I'm like Lou Ludy says all the time. I don't know everything. I want to work with those nonprofit organizations and those advocacy groups and talk to them about the legislation that they had presented prior to me coming to the Senate, if you would elect me, and how can we get that legislation passed so that we can work together to get it in committee, out of committee, to the floor, and get it passed. And I look forward to working with all the nonprofits and advocacy groups on criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard. This is the last question before I allow you to have your closing statements. The legislature has passed both anti-critical race theory laws and a law to mandate Black history. What message does this send to citizens, and what would you advocate for in the legislature? Let's go ahead and start with Jerry Maynard this time.
Anti what? I couldn't hear you.
Anti-critical race theory laws.
Okay, first of all, we've got to make politics back local. Bringing all these laws that have come from outside the state, from these think tank groups and these other racist groups, and bringing it into the state. We have to stop that. We have to say what's in the best interest of our local schools, because of all of us care about our kids and our children. That's number one. Number two, here's what I like to do. I teach race law and society at Belmont University School of Law. And here's what happens. Every time you get progress, there will be half the country trying to swing it back, right? So you always have to be fighting, but you have to be strategic in how you fight. And so when we're dealing with, first of all, critical race theory is not being taught in our high schools, not being taught in our middle schools, and not being taught in our elementary schools. It is a dog whistle for racism. It is to cause fear into white people to think that Black people are somehow trying to engineer their children to think a certain way. And we just have to fight that narrative and fight that narrative and fight that narrative. So any laws that are there, I'm going to try to repeal it. And I'm going to speak truth to power. And we're going to have to make sure that we organize ourselves to let them know how foolish it is to have those laws. And it is based.
Thank you, Mr. Maynard.
Mm-hmm.
Charlene.
Well, first and foremost, this is, like Jerry said, it's a dog whistle. What I believe is this is government overreach as well. I believe in giving authority to our local governments and our local school boards, who shouldn't be partisan, to make the best decisions on the curriculum that is taught in our schools, and to make the best decision with our teachers who know our children the best in our schools to make those decisions. So one, I just don't think these are bills that even should be legislated on in the state level. It's ridiculous. And these are distractions to the real issues that are plaguing our community, like fact, we're sitting on $4 billion surplus in our state budget, but we can't fully fund public schools. We can't fully fund teacher pay raises and educator support staff pay raises, things that actually matter and give real supports to our school system. It's not the critical race theory that is being taught in our schools. And so it's just designed to distract us from the real problems that we fail to address in our state legislature.
Thank you, Charlene, and thank you to you both. This is the end of the formal questioning, and I want to say thank you for being here and answering all those questions very honestly. I would now like to give you guys a closing statement time. You both have 90 seconds to tell the audience what would you like to promote. Promote yourself, and just tell the audience what you want them to know. So let's go ahead and start with Jerry Maynard.
First of all, I want to thank you, Tennessee, and I want to thank, I saw Ludi, but I'm not sure if he was able to get on. I also want to thank Charlene Oliver. I think all three of us are qualified to serve in this state senate as according to your preference about what we stand for, but I think all of us love our community and all of us love our city. I want to start by stating that I want to do several things on the state senate, but my priorities are Nashville more affordable. I want to bring 3,000 new affordable units here in Nashville, working with MDHA and HUD. Number two, I want to eliminate the sales tax on groceries and food to make it better for our working families and for those of us who know that that's the most regressive tax that is in the state of Tennessee. Number three, on gun control, I want to have background checks back. We needed do that red flags laws in order to say that if you have some mental, emotional problems and you do not have the capacity to deal with guns, we want to create a court that will allow you to go and have your case presented before the court so we can say, we think this person through eyewitness and or testimony sees something, say something, they should not have guns. Number three, I want to have health care for everyone. Healthcare is a right. It should be a right. I want to start with state employees. We did it at the Metro level where we provided the Metro Incentive and Healthcare Incentive Act. I sponsored that. I worked on that bill for 1 year where we now have Metro employees can go to General Hospital, the public hospital, free of charge. They don't have to pay any out-of-pocket copay deductibles. We want to do the same thing for state employees to go to one of the 4 public hospitals that are throughout the state, and you don't have to pay anything out of your pocket because most people who file for bankruptcy in Tennessee is because of healthcare costs. We want to make sure we have affordable healthcare for every Tennessean.
Thank you.
I need your vote. I want your vote. Please vote for Jerry Maynard.
Thank you so much, Ms. Charlene.
Yes. Thank you to the Tennessean. Thank you to the listeners who are interested in voting in this race, in this primary. I do think there is a clear choice in this state senate race. It just matters on what your preference is. For me, I think it matters that truth, trust, and integrity matters in this race. I think it matters also that we value leaders who have action over words. And if you look over my track record, I have been someone who has been about action, who has asked questions later, but sprung into action to respond to the crises of the day, especially in our era of politics where Trump and Trumpism is taking over our politics and it's very divisive. But I have been a leader that has been showing up consistently for people that I care about. These issues impact me as well. And I think we need leaders who understand the issues, who aren't out of touch with those issues, who bring not only a wealth of experience like I do, nearly 20 years, but also of lived experience, who live through these policies, who can speak to how they actually translate in real time into people's lives. Also, I think it matters that we have someone who is not beholden to corporate interests. Right now, corporations are winning in our city. They are getting what they need. They're getting their needs met. But what about the people who have lived here, who have called Nashville home for decades? What about those? Those people I'm fighting for. I am not accepting corporate PAC money in this race because I want to be accountable to the people, and I ask for your vote for state senate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you to Jerry as well. Thank you both again for being able to be here and giving very honest answers. And good luck to you guys in the election.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make sure the audience remembers that early voting is going on right now. And then the August 4th election, or the election day is August 4th. So be sure that you have all your registration, make sure you have your ID with you, and please let your voice be heard. So yeah, again, last thing, please make sure that you join the Black Tennessee Voices network. We have an Instagram account now. We have a Facebook page now, and we have the newsletter and the Facebook group as well. So please be involved. You can just type in Black Tennessee Voices, and you'll be able to find it. So with that, this does it for this District 19 Tennessee Senate Forum. So thank you guys again for joining us, and you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.